lecture. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final lecture of the data analytics. So, today we are going to look at two topics. So, basically, part one would be covering complexity analysis of an algorithm, and second part I would be looking at briefly on revision. So, we'll look at what we covered in this part one of the lecture. Okay. So, and perhaps maybe I will have say 10-15 minutes where we can have a sort of discussion about the subject in general. Okay, if you have some questions, any kind of questions, right? I mean, exam related or like coursework. So, I think I'll have 10 minutes for that, so we can have an open discussion for that. Okay. So, that's the rough plan for today's lecture. So, in terms of announcement, I don't have any as such. So, regarding the deadline, so I'm sure you're aware of the deadline for the coursework, which is due in next few days, I guess, right? April 3rd or 4th? 2nd, okay, 2nd of April. So that's the only announcement I guess I have for now. Okay, let me see if I have something, I'll definitely let you know. Okay, so how many of you are from computer science background? So for you, this topic is quite familiar, I guess, right? You must have done this in your undergraduate, postgraduate course. So for those who are new to this complexity of algorithm, so basically when we talk about complexity of an algorithm, we are basically trying to understand the computational resources required for an algorithm to run to completion. Okay, we know what is algorithm, right? Algorithm, basically you have a problem, you basically come up with sequence of steps that you follow to complete the task or to solve the problem. Okay, you have definite sequence of steps. That's the algorithm. So how much resources is needed? So we basically talk about this, when we talk about resource, we are basically trying to imply the computational time and memory required to run that algorithm to completion. So which the terminology that we use is called time complexity and space complexity. Okay. So the total amount of computational time required by an algorithm is called time complexity, and total amount of storage space. So given these two terminology, when we say analyzing complexity, which one do you think it's kind of crucial for us? So though everything is mentioned over there, so if you consider space, right? So you have written a program which is taking say 1 gigabyte of space. I mean, just in a practical situation. And if for some reason your program might require some additional memory, so that is sort of manageable, I would say, right? You can always upgrade your memory. But when we look at time, it's a bit hard to manage time, right? Given the fact that if you're working on a real-time resource where you need to get your result in milliseconds. So you cannot buy time in simple words, right? So time, I would say, is sort of more crucial from an analysis perspective. So when we design an algorithm, so we do care about time complexity. And often, I mean, later on, maybe, I mean, after you complete your course, if you go for interview or so on, so people often tend to ask you questions on this complexity. So you might say big O of n squared, so on. So this terminology you might come across frequently, which we are going to see in the next few minutes. So that's the reason why we focus on time complexity. Okay. Now the question is, how do we analyze time complexity? How do we know how much time your program is going to take to run to completion to give you the results, right? So maybe the color is not. Is it visible, the code, because of the lights? Or should we put down those curtains if it's not visible from the back? Or if you're fine, it's okay. Is it visible, the code? Yeah, so I don't know how to, I try to turn down the lights, but if we, I think that might help a bit. Yeah, much better. Okay, so very naive approach would be to just count the number of steps your algorithm is going to take, right? Very, very naive approach. So let's consider an algorithm that is written over here to compute the average from a given list. A very simple algorithm. So on the left side, I've written the sequence of steps, and on the right side, I'm writing the term or cost. Okay. So a primitive operation like x equal to 1. This is assigning 1 to x. So this is one primitive operation. Let's say this would take cost 1 unit. So in the first line, I'm creating an array or list, getting the length of data, initializing my sum variable to 0, and data address variable to 0, where I'm going to put my result. And then simple for loop, because I need to go through each element of my array. I compute the sum, and after computing the sum, I just need to divide by the total number of elements. So that's a simple average, right? If I need to write this in using NumPy function, there's a simple np dot what? There's a function in NumPy to compute the average. What is that? You're using NumPy, right? There's a function in NumPy to compute an average. What is that? np dot.
np dot mean?
Yeah, np dot mean. Yeah. Have you not used that function? Only one guy had used that function with the entire data in this course, so that's quite surprising. Anyway, so this example is basically for demonstrating what we are trying to understand in context and complexity. So the code is clear to you, right? So we initialize the array, initialize different variables, we loop over the array, we compute the sum, and then finally we take the average. That's it. So on the right, so I'm basically writing count or cost. So data equals to 1, it takes constant time, right? So let's say 1 unit. 1 unit, 1 unit, 1 unit. And this for loop, how many times does it run? How many times does this for loop execute? So there are n elements, right? But okay, this should be n minus 1. So please, I'll correct this later on, because the NumPy array indexing starts from 0. Again, what I'm saying? 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So it will run 5 times basically, but it starts from 0. So similarly this state. And so after that, what we do, let's say we basically count the total. So how many steps was taken? So 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus bar, so that's what we get. So this is the equation. So we can say that if I replace n, which is 5 in our case, because number of elements in our array is 5, right? So what will be the total time? 2 times 5 plus 1. What is that? 11. Are you okay? 2 times 5 plus 1, so 11, right? So we can say that, okay, this algorithm takes 11 units of time to give us the result. Do you agree? Yes or no? Still in sleepy kind of, or okay. So again, so the total time taken to run this algorithm is 2 times 5 plus 1. That is 11. Do you agree or not? Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Oh, sorry. 2n plus 6. Yeah. So that will be.
n7.
N is the total number of elements in my array.
Which is always 7.
So how many do we have? Okay, 7. Yeah, that's correct. Only one identified the problem. I'm saying, so it seems how attentive you are on the last lecture of the course. So it's understandable, no worries. But anyways, the point is, so how we compute this number. But imagine a situation where you are dealing with 10 million numbers. So you have a task. Your array comprises of 10 million numbers, and then, or let's say we don't know how many numbers would come in my array, right? So in such case, it will be quite difficult for us to come up with this representation. Do you agree? I mean, real time, we don't know how much would be the array, right? So it's hard to say, like, give this hard numbers. So that's why we come up with certain sort of approximation in terms of input size, okay, which we'll say in due course of time. So that's primitive approach. Okay, next. In this slide, I have asked a couple of questions So the first statement says that for a given problem P, there can be multiple ways of solving the problem. Is it correct? Do you agree?
Yes.
Because for a given problem, my approach of solving would be different from how you approach that problem, right? I mean, I might come up with an algorithm from my perspective, right? And yours would be different, which means there can be n number of solutions. So the question is, from this n different algorithms, solutions, which one would we choose? Or if I put it in other way, how do we choose an algorithm A over other algorithm B? Are you getting what I'm saying? So you have n solutions to a problem. What are your thoughts on this? Okay. For those who are from computer science, they might have an answer, but this is to the audience who have not explored this topic before. Any thoughts? I've kind of given the answer already in my previous slides.
Whatever executes first.
Yeah, executes faster. That's a good answer. So yeah, that's the question. It's basically we look for time and space complexity. So these are the two important factors that we would like to consider when choosing an algorithm or when designing a solution to a problem. So one point I would like to raise here is that this particular time complexity stuff was not there in previous year course. So this time I thought of putting it here, though I had to squeeze a lot of things, because I felt it's quite important from data analytics perspective, because we're talking about data, we're talking about designing solution to problems. So I felt it's necessary for the touch up to have like kind of this complexity. So this is a very big course there you will find algorithms as just one module, but here I'm going to cover it in a brief manner so that at the end you would know some basic primitive concepts which you can explore later on. Okay, so please be aware of that. So now, as I said in my earlier slides where we were computing the average of numbers, so as I said, so as our input size changes, so it becomes hard to come up with that finite number, right? So we want to kind of approximate the running time in a theoretical sense. So there's something called asymptotic analysis. Okay, it's like approximating. Okay, so before I go here, okay, to give a kind of example on this, okay, if somebody asks you, what is your age, right? What's your age? So you might say, roughly 24, right? We never say that, I was born in this state, this year, this time, kind of long explanation, right? You kind of summarize in a one value. So that summarizes, okay, that's your age. So something like that, you can think of this terminology, asymptotic analysis, where we try to approximate running time as a function of input size, because your running time is directly related to the size of your input. Okay, or in other way, if I put it in the statement, so you can even run in your laptop the same code for 6 numbers. It runs instantly, irrespective of which machine you run. Okay, but if you run for say 2,000 elements or maybe 100,000 elements, so you might have to wait a little, which is all known to us, right? So you can see the time complexity is completely dependent on the input size n. Okay, so that's what we talk about asymptotic analysis. So here I've already mentioned all this. So in our earlier example, 2n plus 6, or let's say 2n plus 7, because there were 7 elements, right? So this is a mistake. No, this is correct, because 6 is the number of steps. This n will be 7, so 2 times 7 plus 6, so that's the time. And that number we can express as order of n. Okay? Considering that my n is relatively very large. Okay? Because when n becomes big, 10 million, then the numbers 2 and 6 doesn't make much sense. It can be ignored, right? Do you agree with this point? When my input n becomes big, then the constant C can be safely ignored. And we can say that my running time, it's of order of n. So that's what we say. Okay? Is it clear? Okay.
So it actually, I don't know, in this case, I think the 2 is quite important. Because if it's, I don't know, 100 times n, it's way different than if it's 2 times n. Even if n is, if n is million, but then the 2, like well, that number is way large. Well, then it's going to be different.
Yeah, this, I mean, as I said, so this is based on assumption that, so these are basically constants. We assume that these are basically this n is large and these constants are much smaller. But as you said, if my n is also, say the original input is also like say 10 millions, and if your constants, let me call this C1, if this is also sufficiently large, then then that might be true. But this context asymptotic analysis assumes that these are smaller in context to n, in which case we can safely ignore the constant terms. Okay, so that's the terminology. That's basically the concept. So under this, we would have 3 different kind of representations. The first one is called Big O notation. Okay, which represents the worst case running time. Okay, Big O notation. Big Omega, which represents the best case running time. Sorry. And Big Theta, so represents the average case running time. Okay, the question is, what do you mean by this terminology when we say best case running time, when we say worst case running time, and average case? So what do you mean by this? What do you understand? Any thoughts? So when I say best case running time, I'm trying to say that, okay, my algorithm A gives me solution in this amount of time. So that is the minimum time, kind of like, you know, you get your solution. Do you agree? If you have any doubts, feel free to like discuss. I mean, this is kind of important concept, I would say, which you should understand. And worst case running time, what does it say? So worst case kind of tells you that, okay, this is the maximum time my algorithm is going to take. Let's say by maximum 8 hours time, when I run my code, within this 8 hours time, I would get the result. It may happen that you might get your result in 20 minutes time. Could happen you could get result in 2 hours time. But your code would not take more than 8 hours time. Is it clear? Similarly, when we say best case running time, it means that my code is going to take at least 1 hour time. You are not going to get your result before 1 hour. So worst case and best case, are you getting what I'm saying? Best case means minimum time, you know, like, okay, this much time it's gonna take. Worst case means, okay, maximum, this is the time. It doesn't mean that, okay, it's going to take that time every step you run, but within that it could fall in any range. Okay? And average, basically, you're kind of knowing that, okay, maximum it can take this much, minimum this much, so it can fall in any range. Or in other words, so explanation is there. So we are sort of trying to put upper bound and lower bound. So when we say best case running time, we are sort of providing lower bound. Okay, we are providing that, okay, this function is going to take, okay, minimum this. It could go above also, but minimum time, this is what it's going to take. And similarly, in worst case, we are providing upper bound to the running time. Okay, and average, so sort of provides tight bound, lower and upper, which is sort of difficult in practice. So among this, which is of interest again? What do you think, we should care about? So in this class, everyone sitting here is data scientist, right? So as a data scientist, we are given a problem, we design solution to the problem, right? We come up with different, like finding data, cleaning data, making data in appropriate format, put it on your machine learning pipeline, you write code, So basically, when you write code, you're designing algorithm to that problem, right? So obviously, these things, even though we don't consider theoretically, but in some sense, we are already implementing this, right? When you design your problem, you never want your algorithm to run forever, right? So you kind of optimize your code. So that's where you're kind of looking at time complexity, I would say. So among these three, which one would be of interest to you? Worst case. How many of you are with worst case? Can you please raise your hands? How would you? Best case, worst case, running time? Which one? Okay, no worries. So yeah. So among this three, best case, worst case, average case, yeah, worst case would be of interest to us because it would be nice to have a kind of sense that what is the maximum time your code is going to run, right? So that's why people often tend to look at this worst case complexity more often. And to give you a brief, like in future, if you go for interviewing with Google, they are kind of very much interested in data structures and algorithms. So you will find this kind of questions quite often. Tell me what is the running time of some algorithm, say some sorting algorithm and blah blah blah. You'll be asked how is it related to this? What's the worst case running time? Okay. So again, representing the same thing in terms of picture. So in this slide I've just copied from because I didn't get time to draw this diagram. So you can visit this link. So there are a lot of interesting stuff explanation. So this is my big omega. So which sort of represents best case running time. So as you can see, okay, before I explain, is this graph understandable? Can you understand what is happening over here? Does it make sense? So on the x-axis we have n, which represents the input size. On the y-axis, so that's basically sort of time, okay, so which is messing over there. And we have two curves, okay, two functions. So here you can see after this value n0, we can see that the two curve separates clearly. There's no like sort of fluctuations, I would say. Okay, so for all values of n bigger than n0, there's a limit. I mean, so for all values of n towards this, we assume this n is sufficiently large, and then we are able to provide a bound approximation. So here this cgn, so this c is my constant which we are talking about. So this we are providing a lower bound. We are saying that your algorithm is going to take at least this amount of time. You're not going to get your solution before this. But it doesn't necessarily mean that okay, it is going to overlap with this every time. So it can fall anywhere. But you'll never get before this. Okay, so that's basically big omega, best case running time. But for values before n, so it's quite hard to approximate. That's what it means. Is this clear? What we have already discussed before in a graphical representation. And similarly, if you look at worst case running time, the same thing, right? So for all values of n greater than n0, and there exists some positive constant c, you see you're providing an upper bound. Okay, your solution can appear anywhere, but it's not going to take more than this. Okay, so that's the worst case representation. Is this understood? Okay. Similarly, so when you combine this two, you get this, where you are sort of providing your upper bound and lower bound. So your running time may lie anywhere in this region. But this is quite hard to know in practice. Okay. So that's the three concepts in terms of complexity analysis. Okay, now, yeah.
How it's like this worst and best case. It's a variation in time. What is it like the basis of this variation? Like what's the factor that influences the time? The time is like gonna be longer.
Okay, maybe I might want to ask that question to you. and in fact everyone. So yeah, see, yeah, I think I should have mentioned that point. So the question what your colleague has raised here is, what are the factors that influence the time? So here we are not considering the computational resources, because of course if you run your program in your laptop, which is the latest one with high-end configurations, right? And if I have a computer which is sort of backdated like 10 years old, and if I run the same algorithm, so obviously there's a difference. But the thing we are discussing here is we are ignoring all the computational constraints. We're saying that when we run the same algorithm on same computational resources, what is the time complexity? And that we express explicitly on behalf of order of your input size. So that's what we are interested in. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, so that was a bit of analysis, a brief on one of the algorithm design techniques. So there are many approaches which we can adopt to design an algorithm to a solution, to come to a solution, right? So you might have heard about terminology called greedy approach. Have you heard this term, greedy? You solve your problem in a greedy manner. You don't think about what's going to happen in future. Let me just solve my problem, and that's what we often do in our real life. I mean, from time to time, right? We don't care about what's going to happen in 2 years' time. Okay, let me just finish something which is important. Greedy. So we don't think about scaling the problem, scaling the solution, because the solution which is working for me now might fail when certain thing changes. So sort of greedy approach. And one of the important, and I find it's very easy approach. This is called divide and conquer, which is also a bit known to you, I guess, right?
It's like math and reduce.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. So basically, you divide the problem. Okay, instead of attempting to solve the problem at one go directly, you tend to divide the problem into parts, and you try to come up solving that smaller part. Because as your problem becomes smaller, it's quite easy to solve, right? Do you agree? Yeah. So that's what. So it has 3 steps: divide, split the problem into parts, okay, as small as possible, okay, to the smallest unit, let's say, and then we conquer. We solve those smaller chunks of problem, and then we combine the solution to those smaller chunks, and we repeat that, which will ultimately give us the solution. So this sort of works in a recursive pattern. Do you know what is recursion? If you write a solution to this problem, so you write a function, so inside this function it keeps calling itself. Okay, that's what we call recursion. Okay, when you design a solution in a divide and conquer approach, so it's good to implement recursive algorithm. So that's that. Now we will look at one example, a sorting example. So by sorting, what do we mean? Arranging numbers in some order, whether increasing order or decreasing order, right? So that's an array which has how many elements? So 7 elements, right? So merge sort is one of the example which employs divide and conquer approach. Okay, at every step we divide the problem into parts, into 2 equal parts, and we keep dividing the problem until we reach the smallest unit. So in my case, in this array, what is the smallest unit? Smallest unit is an array having 1 element, right? Do you agree? So once we reach smallest unit, we solve it. So by this what I mean is, if I have an array that comprises of only 1 element and I want to sort it, so this is already sorted, right? This is already solved, isn't it? So as you can see, we reached this point where we kept dividing the problem, okay? And then, so for this instance, let's say for this instance, maybe I should stand here. So for this instance, you call this divide. So this is your input, you call the same recursive function, divided the problem, okay? And then you solve this problem because this is 1 element, so it's solved already. You conquer the solution, okay? And then you combine it. Conquer and combine, merge, right? So when you merge, again you sort this to array, merged array, okay? So for this, you get this one. Is it clear, this part? Any questions? Yeah? Yeah.
Don't we have to split it again on like 19th and 11th step? We merge on the last row, on the bottom.
This one?
Yeah, because we have to like.
Okay, so ignore these green numbers. This might be confusing because, as I said, I just copied this from here because I didn't have time to kind of draw this. So ignore these numbers. The thing is, after you reach here, you're basically sort of, you could think of this as a reverse procedure in some sense. So what you did here, okay, see for each, because you're going to call this in a recursive manner, okay, so maybe if you can understand, so I think I have a pseudocode, okay, so this is the pseudocode for this. You compute the middle point, split point, okay, left, right. Left you assign 0 index, right you assign the last index of the array, divide by 2, midpoint. Then you call this mod sort again by providing first half, left half of the array and right half of the array. Is it understood? You're calling the mod sort function by passing the left part and right part. Okay, and then for those two parts, once you get the solution for those two parts, we're going to combine this, merge this. Okay, so what happens over here? For this, the first case which I explained was this: you splitted the array into two parts. Then you call the same mod sort over this to input again, right? So which goes to this sequence in recursion, and ultimately for this, when the merge function gets called, so I will be at this point. Is it understood? I will be at this point, then these two array are already sorted. Okay, when you combine, you again sort this array. Okay? Which means when you combine these two array, what will be the time complexity? When you combine this?
It will be million.
No. It's basically order of n, right? Because you'll have to go through each element. It's straightforward, right? So, is this understood, this part? For this is where the merge part, the third part will be called. Because the code, the control will go in a recursive pattern. Do you know what happens in recursion? So when a function gets called, it creates a stack of activation records where it saves the address of your code, so that once it finishes, it needs to come back. So there's push-pop operation happening, right? So over here, I mean, to simplify the problem, so for this, let's say the code was called, again mod sort was called, again it splits, then this was solved, then it will combine. So this is what happens, and this goes for every element. This same pattern happens for every element because each of this is an array. Okay, each of this is an array, and you combine this in this pattern. So that's sort of, if you map this with divide and conquer. So this is basically divide and conquer happening at every step, right? At every step, you are dividing a problem into two parts. Is this clear? Yeah. Okay. So that's the code, pseudocode, I would say. So you don't have to implement this in your lab or anywhere else. It's just for like your understanding about this concept. Okay. And also in exam, I'm not going to ask write the code for merge algorithm. So no. But you need to understand the concept. So I might ask some analytical questions. Okay. So a brief on that. Okay. Now let's talk about best case, worst case, average case running time. I think, okay, let me skip this part. I'll come back to this after I discuss one of the searching algorithm and the complexity there. Okay. So don't look at that solution. Okay, so let me give an example of another algorithm, searching algorithm. Okay, the main task here is to search for presence of an element. Right, you have an array. You want to look for a particular element, whether that element is there in the array or not. Right. So how would we approach this problem? In a simplest manner, basically you have an array. I basically go through each element in the array. I check whether the element I'm looking for is there or not. So I start from left, I go to right, or maybe I can start from right, I come back to the start. Anyway, but then you need to compare each and every element in the array. So this is what we call, it has got a name called exponential search, right? The name of the algorithm. Yeah? The name of the algorithm is linear search because you're linearly searching across every element. Okay, that's the simplest algorithm, but not preferred for many reasons. Because if my input size increases, if I have 10 million records in my array, and you want to look for a particular record, a particular item, searching through 10 million records doesn't make much sense, right? You're going to waste a lot of time. So that's what practically we don't prefer linear search algorithm. And so the linear search in that context would take order of n running time. Do you agree? So if somebody asks you what is the running time of linear search, so you can simply say it's big O of n. Why? Because your algorithm needs to go through each and every element in the array, which means it will have to traverse all n elements. So as n becomes large, so this is not preferred, obviously, right? But if my array is sorted in place, whether increasing order, decreasing order, then there's an efficient algorithm called binary search, which again sort of employs divide and conquer paradigm. Okay, where you divide the problem into parts and solve it, and this is much more faster because every time you're dividing the problem into two parts. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, so this is an example for linear search. When you're looking for element 5, you need to go through every element. So you can roughly say the complexity is order of n. Okay, you might argue that, oh, my element 5 is here, it's not there, it's not at the end, but in general we are kind of approximating with n, right? Okay, so now let's look at the complexity of this algorithm. So this is the pseudocode of binary search algorithm. Okay, the input array is my sorted array, and k is the element you are looking for in the array. Okay, before I go here, okay, let me ask you, if you were given a task to design an algorithm, okay, search algorithm, where we know that there is going to be like a huge amount of records, say 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, whatever. So what kind of data structure would you prefer? Any thoughts? Anyone? It's very simple, right? Order. That's not exactly what I'm asking. My question is, like, if you have large number of records and if your task is to, you're basically interested in optimizing your search time, right? Obviously, I would not want to go for linear search or whatever. So, what kind of data structure would be very handy in my case? Any random guesses? Yeah? Circularly linked list. Let's not go there. Because then I'll have to talk about linked list and all that stuff. No, not exactly linked list. It's very simple actually. No, if I'm not going for linked list, so I'm not going to talk about tree as well. So it's a simple dictionary. Have you heard of terminology called hashing? Dash tables, right? Dictionary, right? Python dictionary. So let's say we have like 10 million records records of person, okay? And we can use name, obviously name might repeat, but maybe we can use a tricky way to encode repeated names in some way. And we can use the name as a key and you put the records. So if you, so the time would be taken only in creating that dictionary. Once that dictionary is populated, so at search time, you just, so what record you want to search, you just pass your name, it will just retrieve the record. And compare this with the linear search. Okay, one algorithm was linear search where you put this 10 million records and you have this dictionary. And then you can compare. So this is what we talk about algorithm analysis. And we are running the two algorithms on the same device. So in this case, which one would we prefer? Obviously, passing, right? The dictionary. Are you getting a sense of what we're trying to understand over here? Yeah? Okay, so coming back to this binary search. So this code returns -1 if the element is not found. Okay, now the approach it follows it's basically divide and conquer. So we set low and high index 0 and n-1. We need to loop. Okay, this is the condition, very important, because when we deal with array, we need to be very, very careful with indexing, because that might screw up a lot of things. Okay, so indexing is very important. So how long your loop needs to execute, so that's controlled by this. Okay, no needs to be always towards the left, because every time we are going to split the array and break the problem. So after that, what we do, we compute the midpoint. Mid equals to, so low plus high by 2, so that will give the midpoint. And then I basically check, because my array is sorted, right? So the logic here is very simple. If my search element is less than middle element, if my search element is less than middle element of the array, then I know that my search element is never going to be on the right side of the array. Are you getting what I'm saying? Does this make sense? If the element which I'm searching is less than the middle element of the array, then I know that my search element is never going to be on the right side. So I can safely discard the rightmost array after that middle point. In fact, I can ignore the middle point also, right? Are you getting what I'm saying? So if that happens, what I'm saying is I'm setting my high pointer to mid -1. Okay, mid -1. Is it clear? Or otherwise, another situation that can happen is, else if my k is greater than mid element. If the element which we are searching is bigger than mid element, then we know that it's never going to fall on the left side. So we can just focus on the right side, dropping one part of the array. Is it clear? So at every step, what is happening is we are dividing our problem. We are throwing away one sub part of the array. If none of this happens, what is the ideal case? Then it implies that the middle element which we found is the search element. Because there can be three cases, right? Either my key is less than middle element, either my key is greater than middle element, or it's same. So this default case implies, so return mid, so return the index of that element. Do you agree with this statement? Yeah? Understood? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, great. So here is the picture. We have 8 elements, and let's say the element which we are searching is 1, k equals to 1. So now my problem is of size n. Okay, n is equal to 8, so that's the size of the problem. So what happens is, I'll compute the mid, which will be 4th index, right? If you go through the code, so I'll compute this, I'll find this index, I'll check my key with this. Then I know that my key is less than this mid element. So then I'm dropping this entire right side. Yeah? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Again, after this, what will be my size of the input? My problem size, size of the problem, it's n by 2 already, right? Here you can think of this element also, which is ignored here. That might be confusing for you. You might say, okay, that's 3, but this is 4. Just ignore that. Let's think about in asymptotic sense. because this was also taken into consideration when we split it, and then we discarded it, right? Because when we do this mid, we are taking the mid elements, so 4 elements, and then because this was done, so I just plotted this. So don't get confused with that. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is our problem is divided in 2 parts. So where we ignore one part of the array. Again, the same code is done because my low is still less than high. Low is this one, high is this one. Okay. Condition satisfied, you come to the mid. So mid will be this index. Okay. And then you check whether your search element is less than or greater than this. So it's less than. So you are ignoring this part of the array. Then you end up with this. Now, when you run the same code, so the mid element is this one. So when you compare, so you found your element. So what has happened over here is you kept dividing your problem in a recursive manner. You kept dividing, and you reach to a point where the problem is no more divisible. So you reach to the smallest unit, and it will seem to give you an answer whether the element is there, right? And this is much more faster if you compare with linear search, obviously. This algorithm clear. Again, this algorithm won't come in exam, but it's good to know binary search. I mean, this is a very, very, very basic algorithm, I would say. Now, let's talk about complexity. What will be the complexity? Okay, if I go to the next slide, there is an answer, so I'll just stick to this slide. Okay, yeah. Sorry? Order of 1 for best case. Why do you say so?
If the element you're searching is the first element that's found in the array, that's the middle, then it's order of 1 that only searches that element and retrieves that element.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that's true.
Log n will be from the first case.
Can you say why log n?
Because you divide the array and then you will see which side it falls. So you have the half of the array, then you have to search that. The element is older than the element to search the remaining left part of the array.
Okay. Yeah, very true. So your background is from computer science? Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so what she said is correct, but anyways, let's forget what she said for now, for the time being. And this question is to those who are from non-computer science background, because obviously if you have already seen, so, I mean, my point here is try to think, because we understood the problem, right? What is happening. So now, try to kind of think and formulate what is happening. So best case, we already know what the best case thing means to us, right? So the worst case means it's going to run for maximum time. Best case, it's going to run for the minimum time. So what, I mean, based on this, obviously, it entirely depends on the input, right? So we have already got a lot of clues from her, but anyways, any thoughts from those non-CS background? Or is it too hard? Or I'm not able to explain properly? Because this is our last lecture, so feel free to have a lot of discussion, so we can discuss it. I'll try as much as I can to make these concepts understood. Yeah? You want to say something?
No, it's fine. Worst case will be like left with our number. Required number is leftmost or rightmost.
Okay. Leftmost or rightmost, yeah. Yeah, in some sense, okay. Okay, so, okay, let me talk about this best case. As we already know, your colleague have mentioned, the best case will be, what if my element 1 was, no, it won't happen, obviously, it needs to be sorted. So what if my search key was, say, 4? Okay. In this case, what would happen? The code will go here, it will come to the mid point, right? So neither this condition gets satisfied, my k is not less than mid element, so this one come inside this loop, inside this if, it will check the else if condition. If my k is greater than a mid, again not true, so it will come over here straight. Sorry, the default case. The default case we have designed is when the code finds the middle element to be the search key. So it will come over here and it will simply return. So this will be the best case, right? Yeah? Because this is the minimum time the algorithm is going to take. Can you find minimum time beyond this? No. Because the first time you ran your code and it found it, it's like kind of, you can think of your hashing in this example. The first time only it found the solution. So that's the best case running time. So, irrespective of your input size, whether we have 8 elements, whether we have 80,000 elements, 8 million elements, the best case would always take constant amount of time. Do you agree? The best case running time of binary search would take constant amount of time. If I assign that constant time to be 1 unit, then irrespective of my input size, the code will always give you the best solution in 1 unit time. Is this understood? Yeah?
But if like here we have 8 elements,
Yeah.
but if we have 7 elements, then it will require one more iteration to get the middle point.
I mean,
Then it won't be constant.
because here you can take integer. Yeah, in that case maybe it will run for 2 iterations. Okay, it might run for 2 iterations. But then if you look this from an asymptotic sense, when my n is getting bigger, forget about odd and even. Obviously, if you consider your input to be odd, then maybe we may not get that solution at the first instance, right? Then it might divide the problem and it might go to step 2, right? But then if you represent this solution, so this will be constant, right? Is it clear? Or, I mean, in fact, you can try in your example also, like, so what happens over here? So, let's take an example of this where we don't have 8 elements. So, what will be the mid?
In both cases, mid will be the same
Mid will be in,
because we are taking the quotient. Low plus I by 2.
yeah, so it will be 3, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. So, the 3 index will be this. Yeah? Because the array indexing starts from 0. So we are dropping, so this will be 3.5. So we take 3. So the 3 index is this one. And in fact, in this case also, this will be constant. That's what I'm saying, right? It will be like, we represent this as order of n, sorry, order of 1. So when we say order of big O of 1, it means that the running time is taking constant time. Okay? So that's the constant time. Okay, now if we look at worst case running time, which means the maximum number of iterations the code might run to get solution, or it may not get solution. Which means this case, right? So it will keep splitting my array into parts until it reaches this point. So the result will be either element found or element not found. It will return, right? So this will be the worst case scenario. And also, what would be the average case? Average case also would be sort of same, because it has to go through all the parts and it comes to this situation. So in this binary search, worst case and best average case would sort of be similar running time. And what will be that? I don't have marker to sort of draw this, but okay. So this will be order of log n. Okay, why? Because you can see your problem is getting divided every time. At this point of time, it reaches 1 unit. Okay, how many steps does it need to take to get this 1 unit? So that will be, you can say, if you take this, and every time you're dividing into 2 equal parts, so you can say n divided by 2 to the power I equal to 1. So your I is what you want to find, right? So how many steps you needed to split to get this? So that I, when you do the math, so that will be log of n. I don't have marker, otherwise I would have shown that. So it is understood a bit of basic math. Yeah. So yeah, the worst case and average case will be log of n. Okay, order of log n. Okay. So try to remember this scenario, because now we are going to map this into our merge sort analysis, which is also another divide and conquer approach. Okay. Okay, now let's go back and see this. Okay. Okay, so what happens over here? It's merger algorithm runs on order of n log n, whether it be best case, average case, worst case. It's same. Okay, you might get this question in the interview. People might, what is the worst case running time of merger? So you can say it's order of n log n. So if they ask why, so you need to explain the reason, right? So what is happening? This is much more similar to binary search, you can think, but the difference here is, in case of binary search, we were at every step we were discarding one sub array completely. We were traversing only one part of the array. Every time one part is getting discarded. But here, though we are dividing into two parts, for each sub part we need to solve that problem. So at this step you can see, okay, if this was, so this is like binary search, you reached here, right? So this is log n already. Is it clear? Right? You split your problem and you reach here. And you do this for every element. So there will be n elements, right? And then you solve this. So when you merge this, so this merging takes order of n. Because for this you consider my array is having only two elements, it's order of n. Similarly, when you merge this to order of n. So this would happen for all n elements. So that's why it's order of n log n. Okay? Is it clear? Yeah? And there cannot be order of one time to get the best solution, because it has to go through all division step and it has to follow all the pattern, either in worst case, average case or best case. So that's why the running time of merge search algorithm in three cases is its order of n log n. Okay? So yeah, so I'll try to quickly wrap up and give you a break. So this is sort of a common order of growth classification, time constant time representation. So we say constant time to be order of 1, yeah?
So when you're talking about logarithm n, so for the binaries sort as log base 2.
Log base 2, yeah.
So do we, is it common to mention the base?
No, I think that's not important. No. So this is interesting to know. Okay, so the different asymptotic representation complexity. So constant time we represent as order of 1. Okay, and logarithmic basically log of n. Linear, it's order of n. Linear rhythmic, so it's n log n. Okay, quadratic n square. Cubic exponential. So examples, we have seen couple of examples already, right? So what would be the example for constant time running? So a binary search where we find the middle element as the key. So that would be a constant time representation. And logarithmic, we have already seen binary search, worst case, average case, linear, n. The first code which we saw, finding the sum of average in the array. Okay, let's not go there. How about quadratic? When your running time would be taking order of n square. Can you give an example? Yeah.
Nested loops.
Nested loops. Yeah. If you have two for loops, right? Two for loops, your code is going to run for each outer value of loop. It will run for n iteration in the inner loop. So there's a n square. Similarly, cubic, there will be 3 for loops. A common example would be matrix multiplication. Okay, in matrix multiplication, you need to control rows, columns, and you need to match that constraint. Okay, so that's a common example. So here, sort of summary of the same what I described. So you can read this later on. And in exponential, what you're doing is you're kind of doing exhaustive search between every pair in your list. Okay, so doing exhaustive search, so that would require this exponential time. Yeah, so I won't explain much because already everything has been explained. Okay, so there are some references, things where I copied the pictures, so you can check Gigs for Gigs, this website, which is very good if you want to explore further. Again, there's a point mentioned, so the links and things mentioned here are just for your exploration. So from exam perspective, you don't have to go deeper. Okay, so whatever has been explained in the slides, I think that should be enough. Again, sort of analytical, so given this, how things are happening. So that completes this lecture.